collar on. There we go. Does that work? All right. We're moving right along. We are going to be looking at Jacob. We've examined Abraham, Isaac, kind of taking a detour from Isaac tonight. We'll come back to him briefly. We're dealing with 5 chapters tonight, and when I was trying to figure out how to treat this fairly, but yet, it's difficult. There's a lot of information here, but there's an interesting phenomenon with these chapters, and that's guiding what I'm going to do tonight, and that is what's called bookending. And I'm not sure if that's the proper term, but that's how I describe it, where an author will put 2 thematically related events on one end and the other of a section of the book, and then there'll be material in the middle that kind of supports what's going on both ends, but then the back end comes back and relates to the front end. And so I call that bookending. And so what we have is chapter 28, and I've got the bookends in yellow here, is chapter 28. We have Jacob's dream. Remember, those of you that are more familiar with Scripture, the dream he had of the ladder between heaven and earth and the angels. So we have that event, and we have a conversation where God speaks to Jacob. That forms the front end. And then chapters 29 through 31 relate a lot of information about how Jacob's family came about, his wives, his children, his conflicts with Laban, his uncle. And we have all of those stories, which are very good, and they inform, but they're not the main point, really. And then in chapter 32, we have the closing bookend, where we have this climatic event of Jacob wrestling with a man, an angel of God. And what happens there relates directly to the front bookend and the things that God speaks to Jacob. The location is the same location, Bethel. And so that's significant because the author knows this, and then he places the story of Jacob in the middle, in between it, that helps explain what's going on at the end and what's going on at the beginning. So that's what I'm going to do tonight. I'm going to spend more time at the beginning and at the end, and then I'm going to kind of really speed through the middle. Now, my notes, I'll have more details on the middle, so I'll give you those. I'm not saying that those things that happened are not important, but I don't think that they are the main point of what the author was trying to bring out in this. Remember, it's not just a history. It's a history that is intending to teach us something about God, something about God's people, how God interacts with his people. And so that's what I've decided to do here. And so we'll camp out on chapter 28 and 32 today. And hopefully, if I do this well, you'll see why and how this fits together. Just to tie everything together from where we've been to now, we know that last week we examined Jacob, with the help of his mother, tricks his father Isaac into giving the blessing of the firstborn. He pretends to be Esau. Isaac is fully intending to give the blessing to Esau, his eldest. Jacob tricks him, and he receives the blessing. Esau is understandably upset. Kind way of putting it. Seriously considers killing his brother as soon as his father passes away. Your life's mine. And that's basically Esau's attitude. I'll wait. Daddy can't live forever. And so because of that, leads right into chapter 28, where we see Rebekah understanding her sons, also understanding her husband, and she tells Jacob, you need to leave. You need to let Esau cool off, go back to my brother Laban, and hang out there a while. But what she presents to Isaac is, you don't want your son Joseph taking wives from the Canaanites let's send him back to my brother Laban so that he can choose a wife from amongst our own people. Now Isaac, he knows what's going on. He's not dumb, but Isaac agrees to this. So yes, this would be better. I don't want to have a murder on my hands. And so we see Jacob traveling back to Haran, where Laban lives, the land of Aram, the Arameans. And this is when he stops at this place to rest for the night, and he has this dream. And so that's where we're going to focus on that dream and what happens, because that's key. I think the author wants us to do this, just the way it's framed. And so I'm going to pull up just a few of the verses. I encourage you, turn to chapter 28 so you can read around the things that I'm bringing out. I don't want to. And so if you see things that you want to have addressed, just let me know. So we read in verse 28, or in verse 12 of chapter 28, and he dreamed, and behold, there was a ladder, some versions will say stairs, set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. No commentary, no explanation, just a description. It's all we're given. Jacob doesn't go, gee, I wonder what this means. Then there's none of that. The author intentionally leaves us hanging, I think. This is anticipating. What's this mean? What's going on here? I see a depiction of a connection between God's realm and the realm of man, between heaven and earth. That's significant. But again, the text itself at this point does not give us any explanation whatsoever. So for the moment, I want to just kind of leave it like that. Leave it the way the author presented it. Because what the author does, no explanation, but jumps immediately to this conversation, or this where God speaks to Jacob in relation to this dream. So it's a little bit long, and I'll explain what I've got underlined here in a bit. But this is verses 13 through 15, so right after this. And behold, there's that behold again. That just basically means pay attention, this is important. We've had 3 of them now. Behold, behold, behold. The Lord stood above it. Above it. What is it? The stairs. But it's okay in Hebrew to do this. The word for above can also mean besides, near. It has a very wide. It's like our prepositions. English prepositions can have. What's the difference between on, in, and upon, and within? So Hebrew has that same issue. So another way of looking at it is he stood beside him. Based on what's going on, I see beside him being a little more probable here, but I'm not going to fuss over it. But he speaks to him. I am the Lord. Now, as you listen to this, think about what sounds familiar to you. Based on where we've been so far. I am the Lord, the God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give to you and to your offspring. Your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south. And in you and your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Behold, there's the 4th one. I am with you and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land. For I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. And that's just loaded. So let's just open it up. Statements and things that sound familiar, that have been said before. Where have they been said before?
In my mind, it's the same thing was said to Abraham.
Yes.
So are we coming down? God is still making that promise.
Yeah. to Jacob. Yeah, we see God's promise progressing through the generations. It's not come to pass yet. Abraham is dead. Well,
How far many years between Abraham and Jacob?
let's see. Abraham was, he was 40. At this point, not very long. Because Isaac was 40 when he married Rebekah. I'm sorry. Yeah, so we're looking at now, I would say, maybe 10 to 20 years-ish, because Jacob spends 20 years with Laban. So not very long at this point. But we saw it with Isaac. When God extended and affirmed the covenant with Isaac, he did the same thing. He worded it the same way, and he mentions your father. And so God's just saying, hey, I realize it hasn't come to pass yet, but in the meantime, it's following you. This is the last time we see this spoken to an individual. After this, God speaks to the nation. You know, he speaks to Moses, but as far as this, in this covenant kind of language, he approaches Moses this way, but he doesn't make the covenant with Moses. He just merely identifies himself as the God of the covenant. So after this point, that's why the Hebrew people placed such high esteem on Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Why did they do that? Why does God stop here? Because now that nation that God promised, in the next few chapters, we're seeing the formation of that nation with the birth of Jacob's sons. We see the 12 tribes, the originators of the 12 tribes coming to pass. So anything else, that's good. The covenant language is passed on now to Jacob. How significant is that based on what's happened so far in Jacob's life? He's connived, he's cheated, he's conned, and God comes to him. Says, it's you. You're the one.
So was that all in God's plan?
Well, see, I was hoping, I was waiting for somebody to step into the trap. No, I mean, somebody's got to trip it.
It was really one day.
But yeah, we have this tension of, does this mean God approved of Jacob's actions? No.
I don't think so, but he knew what was going to happen.
Yeah, what did he tell Jacob's mom? He told her, you know.
I think that just shows how patient, loving, everything that our God is.
Yeah, and yeah, it does demonstrates his long suffering. It also demonstrates the unchanging nature of his sovereign will. It's going to happen, you know. And at this point, especially in the game, if man could have messed it up, they've already done it. I mean, you know, if this was up to man, and God's just demonstrating over and over again, it's like the author of Hebrews has, I think it's in Hebrews, uses this odd expressions where God overlooked. Is that the term he uses? That in the past God overlooked things. Well, when Christ came, you see suddenly that's with us. He's like, not overlooking nothing now, because you guys have the whole picture. He understood they didn't know anything. You know, so there's you see a lot more, I guess, leniency in a way with the patriarchs, where you're kind of wondering, like, why does God put up with that? Because we're looking through Christian eyes, and God doesn't put up with it anymore. But back then, he knew their ignorance. He knew, you know, that he's going to have to work through a lot of... And so here we just see this, that God's purpose, his promise, is not going to be thwarted by any stupid thing Jacob does. Abraham didn't mess it up. Isaac didn't mess it up. Jacob tries really hard to mess it up. Anything else you guys see? But those are really good. Those, you know, you see the covenant language, the long suffering of God, his determination. This is kind of minor, but I'll throw this one out there. That first thing I have underlined, how does God identify himself? The God of Abraham. Jacob, I am the God of Abraham. and the God of Isaac. And he stops. He's not Jacob's God yet, per se. Well, again, I'm kind of cheating and going ahead a little bit, but he identifies himself by, hey, you know that God your grandfather and your dad were talking about? That's me. Now I'm talking to you. You know, and that's similar to us when God approaches us. Hey, you know that God everybody's been talking about in church? Remember the first time God tapped you on the shoulder and identified himself? You know, we call it conviction, the conviction of the Holy Spirit, but it's the same idea. God's like, hey, Keith, let me tell you who I am. And when it pops into our mind, he's talking to me. It's no longer just this thing I'm reading about, this guy I read about, or this experience my dad had or my grandpa had. He's talking to me. You know, that personal. And we say, well, God became personal in the New Testament. No. He's always been that way. It's just, you know, so, yeah.
One of the things I'm being really looking at, it says your offspring in you and your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed.
Yeah.
He's not talking about just.
Good. This is not, the inclusive language that he spoke to Abraham. He's repeating it through here, but this is, again, more important now. Not just your family, Jacob, because now we're getting ready to see the birth of the nation that God promised. And he really reiterates that universal, all the nations of the earth are going to be blessed through this nation that's coming from Abraham, the nation I promised Abraham. So that's good. See, this is good. Here's my list. If you have anybody have anything else, real quick, yeah.
One other thing is, you go down to the end of verse 15.
Uh huh.
I will not leave you until I've done what I promised. Now, I take that as face value is the time's coming, I'll turn it back on you. I mean, he's promising, I'm going to be with you
Right.
until everything's done that I promised you.
Which I guess it would be Jacob's entire life at this point.
Promise came with Christ.
Yeah, but
Promise came with Christ.
Yes.
yeah. So it actually, I mean, if you read it that way, so well, then that means his whole life. It's permanent. You know, if it happens, yeah, that's interesting. The way of, I mean, it is true, but at the same time, we're looking at it and we know, well, this didn't happen in Jacob's lifetime either. So that meant God was with him his whole lifetime. But when you said that, when you first read that verse, something else popped into my mind was, I'm going to say it the way Jesus said it, I will never leave you nor forsake you. You believe in God, believe also in me. And you know the rest of that. You see the echoes of that in that last verse? God saying, I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised. Jesus said the same thing. I'm not leaving you until I've done what I've promised. That doesn't mean he's going to leave, once we're in glory, that Jesus is like, see you guys, I got you here. But it's that expression of, I'm not leaving. Ultimately what it means is, I'm not leaving. Good. Well, that's good.
The ladder's just weird,
Uh-huh.
but Abraham was like the next story after that. Trying to build a ladder to heaven
Mm-hmm.
so they could come and go as they please, as the angels were doing. But
Yep.
this isn't like some weird mythos from thousands of years ago for Jacob.
No, this is really,
Is like the first narrative after the Babel narrative. And so he would have heard stories, like he would have recognized this for what it was, I think, more than we do. Like just reading it with 2023.
like, isn't that what our people just tried to do?
Yeah.
But now it's God doing it.
It's so like, oh, and then there was a ladder and angels were just keep on with the story. I have this stuff like there's a light.
Well, he does comment after it though, after he wakes up. It says, and he was afraid, he said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven.
But
Yeah.
he recognized it for what it was.
Yeah, well, he called it, yeah. Yeah.
build a way to get to heaven so they could go to heaven.
And what you're alluding to, let me actually hang on to that for a second. I want to do one thing, and then I think I'm going to jump right to, this is very pertinent to what you're bringing up about this image of the ladder. So you guys hit all of these. This was just my list when I was trying to think of what does the language echo? Well, it has connective language, meaning the God of Abraham is now connected to Jacob. He addresses him. The covenant language, which you guys brought out, that's been repeated to Abraham and through Isaac, and now it's being repeated to Jacob, meaning it's the same covenant that's being talked about. And then foreshadowing of I don't know if you saw this, the foreshadowing of the experiences of the nation Israel in this account. I will bring you back. Remember, he's talking to Jacob because Jacob's leaving his home, and God's basically saying, yeah, Jacob, I'll bring you back to this land. But there's also an echo that's going to continue all through these chapters of the Exodus, of Israel the nation, almost blurring with Israel the man. And so God promising his own people, the nation of Israel, yeah, I'm going to bring you back to the land of promise. So you're starting to see within the life of Jacob, you're seeing a type of the nation of Israel, which then it goes from a person to a nation, and then New Testament it drops back to the person of Christ as being that nation. And it's just interesting. You're seeing one of the first kind of allusions, I guess you would call it, to Israel's experience. And then foreshadowing of Jacob's wrestling with God, that's a little more subtle, but you see within this idea of a blessing, God extending the blessing. Later on, we're going to see Jacob almost demand it. And so this is a little more subtle, that last one. And so here's Jacob's response, which I think you were starting to read it a minute ago. After this, Jacob makes a vow. Now again, this is before the law. God says don't do that, but Jacob does it, and God doesn't seem to make a big deal out of it here, but Jacob vows, if God will be with me. Well, he just told you he would, right? You see that? Okay, you said that, God, but if you'll be with me and keep me in the way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God. The audacity of this man. Prove yourself, and then you'll be my God. Now, but then after this, and this stone, he's talking about the stone that he laid down to use as a pillow. In between all of this, he takes that stone and he makes it into an altar and he pours oil on it and he does all of this. So now he's talking about that stone. This stone which I have set up for a pillar shall be God's house. Really? I'm sure God's really appreciative that you made him a house. Now, I'm being sarcastic on purpose, but I want you to see a little bit of Jacob's not there yet. You notice the attitude here, the uncertainty of like, okay, you prove yourself. And so he sets up this thing, gets all excited, and this shall be God's house. And all that you give me, I'll give you a tenth back. Gee, aren't you generous? Well, again, remember the bookend. This is the before picture. And the author's doing this on purpose. This is our before picture. Now, what does he name this place? Bethel, which means house of God, Bethel. And you see this in Scripture in the Old Testament. It becomes a very prominent, what they call sacred space, holy place for Israel, all the way up until pretty much when Jerusalem kind of takes over in the temple. Yes?
So, I just did some looking because every time you see Bethel, it always mentions it was formerly called Luz.
Mm-hmm.
And I just did some looking. It's interesting because the word Luz derives from where an almond tree grows. And every time it also, you see it used in Jeremiah, the word almond branch looks a lot like one who watches and
Yeah, it's a witness tree.
It's a witness tree, but it's also, every time you see almond, it was Aaron's staff that budded. It was almond blossoms in the temple. And it's very specific in how almonds were used.
It's difficult,
In
yeah.
conjunction with the house of God, but it's also means to watch over and witness.
And then he sets up a,
Play on
yeah.
words that God's actually, with God as my witness. you know,
And later, and that's a good point, the idea of this witness, because what Jacob is setting up is also known as a witness stone. You know, that stone was witness to what Jacob, the vow that Jacob made. You know, and so they would use, sometimes it'd be a tree, other times they would set up a rock, and then every time somebody walked by that rock, what's the deal with this rock? That rock saw this. It's a witness, and you see it in the prophets. They talk about the mountains being witnesses and God calling on the creation. Witness my people, what they have done. You know, so yeah, that's a neat. There's probably all kinds of subtlety.
Look at Aaron's right side of this. It was,
Yeah, and
God was a witness against it. This is the priestly line.
right.
So you see that it's that witness aspect. Yeah, sure. Change the name, I'll witness it.
Yeah, and what you're getting at too. I'll add to it here. I think with this next bit is Jesus makes a very interesting reference to this. If you remember when we were in the Gospel of John, early on, when he's choosing his disciples, and Nathanael, remember Nathanael, the true Israelite, as Jesus kind of in a mocking way, you're a true Israelite. And Nathanael is amazed because Jesus says, yeah, when you were sitting under the tree, I saw you. And it just blows his mind. He's like, you are the Son of God. And Jesus is kind of like, really? That's all it took? And then he says something interesting. So in John chapter 1, verse 50, Jesus answered him, because I said to you, I saw you under the fig tree, you believe? And my version of it is, you ain't seen nothing yet. But he says, you will see greater things than these. And he said to him, truly, truly, I say to you, you will see heaven opened and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man. So Jesus is identifying himself as that ladder that Jacob saw. Even using Jacob's language, this is the gate of heaven. I am the door. You see that? I am that ladder. I am that access. And he purposely does this. Now also, Bethel, the house of God, Jesus is identified as the temple. Destroy this temple. He may have even been doing this. Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I'll raise it up. The house of God. Not the house of God. Jacob said, yeah, I'm making this the house of God because I saw this dream. But again, Jesus is that ascending and descending. Where did that ladder touch down? I think on the rock at Bethel, the house of God. So Jesus is basically associating himself with this thing Jacob saw. Just kind of find that very. Anytime Jesus intentionally does this, it's like, okay, and that's where I get the earlier explanation of, well, what was that ladder? It was a connector. Well, because I know who Jesus is, and so you're seeing the work of Christ making that access available, and the person of Christ being the object upon which that sits, the solid object on which that ladder sits. So he's not only is he the means to God, he's the anchor that makes sure that means to God remains. And then you can add in house of God. Why? What's that mean? That's where God chooses to dwell. We have this whole long history with Israel and building God houses. And I think again it was a concession in a way when God told David, yeah, I know you want to build me a house. I don't need a house. I'm going to build you a house. Who is he? He was talking about Christ. David heard, my son, okay, I'll get all the stuff ready and tell my son how to build it, give him the blueprints, and Solomon builds this beautiful thing. And I think God's like, all right, whatever. I'll humor you. It wasn't what I meant, but fine. And he uses it, and he dwells in the temple and all of that. But ultimately, God will say, no, I'm the one going to be building the house. I don't need a house. You're going to be my house. And in the New Testament, we hear that, we are the temple of, Paul, do you not know you're the temple of the living God? That God within us, the Holy Spirit within us. So, anyway.
There's also a lot of people who the word became flesh and
And tabernacled, yeah, that language is intentional.
Yeah. Yeah, he was the house that was promised.
Yeah, and so the house is a big motif. And it kind of starts here, with Jacob and getting excited, hey, I saw God and he talked to me, but I don't know yet. I want to test him. And it's interesting. Now we'll jump back to Genesis again. And this is the part that, like I said, we're going to fly through this. I'm not trying to shortchange we got to get to the end. So make sure, because I think that's the important, get to the other bookend. So the chapters that follow this, 29 through 31, we see Jacob arriving at Haran. He finds Laban's house. He meets Rachel, falls in love with Rachel, makes a deal with Laban to work for him for 7 years to get Rachel as his wife. Jacob meets his match. He meets his conniving match in his uncle Laban. Because on the wedding night, and again, this is a cultural thing. You think, well, how did he not know? They did things weird. Wakes up, you ain't Rachel. Laban, what have you done? You gave me your older sister. You gave me the ugly one. He said, well, I can't give away the older sister or the younger sister before the older. What's the matter with you? You don't know how we do things here. Fine, I'll work another 7 years for Rachel. And so he has 2 wives now, 2 sisters. Lovely. They don't really get along because one of them is having children right and left. The other one is barren. So there's this resentment going back and forth. So then the younger one says, hey, maybe Sarah was right. Take my handmaiden. And so she has a couple of kids. And then Leah didn't want to be outdone. She said, well, I've stopped having kids, so I'll do that too. Take my handmaiden. And so she has 2 kids. So now you got 4, 5, 6, 7. You got 8 kids. Then Leah starts having kids again. So she ends up with 6, and then the 4 from the handmaiden. So there you got 10. And then finally, Rachel has a son. What's his name? Joseph. Guess who the favorite son is? And we'll get to that next time we meet. But so that's what's going on. It's just relating that strife within the household. It's relating the strife between Jacob and Laban because they're two guys cut out of the same cloth, both trying to outdo the other one. But in the midst of all that, God continues to bless Jacob. Everything Jacob touches turns to gold, so to speak. There's lots of weird stories about trickery with the animals and using mandrakes, and a lot of the divining and weird stuff but later on we're going to see Jacob confesses it and God backs him up that God is the one blessing him. And Laban knows it and it ticks him off because Laban keeps trying to do things to connive and it just keeps working in Joseph's favor. So pretty soon, it comes to a head. Joseph has been there 20 years now. And he's sick of it. And so he goes to his wives. He said, here's what I'm going to do. I'm out of here. I'm taking all my stuff and heading home. Just wanted you guys to know, are you okay with this? And it's interesting because he's actually consulting his wives.
You mean Jacob?
Jacob. Sorry, I got my, yeah. Got to keep me in line here. I got a lot of names in my head. But his wives are kind of like, yeah, our father has cheated us out of our birthright, our heritage, our inheritance. He's spent it all. He's not treated you right. We don't have anything left here. So yeah, we're going with you. So Jacob actually, he's with his wives. Suddenly Rachel and Leah are united. They're not fighting each other now. Now they're uniting behind their husband. You're starting to see a family actually unified, saying, yeah, we're going to leave. So they leave. They sneak off because Laban was off somewhere else. Laban finds out. goes after him. Do you see echoes of Egypt just in that little scenario there? They escaped in the night. Egypt finds out, pursues them, and it says that Laban pursued him for 7 days. You don't chase somebody for 7 days unless you're hacked off. And we see God interrupt him. Come to Laban and say, leave him alone. That's my paraphrase. But you just watch yourself. Is basically the language seems very straightforward, but the meaning of the word that's used is basically, it says, the literal is, let's see. No, I don't have it in here. Actually, I've got it on my notes here. Let me read it to you real quick. Or tell you what verse it is so you can see it. Where is it?
29.
Yeah, verse 24. This is where he comes to Laban. 29 is where Laban relates it back to. So basically he says, take no action against Jacob, either good or evil. In other words, he's basically, the wording of that is, leave him alone. And something about that kind of, I guess, Laban still keeps going, meets up with him, and they have it out, verbally. Joseph vents 20 years of frustration about how he's been treated. Laban plays the hurt daddy that didn't get to say goodbye to his grandchildren. You know, you took my house god. Yeah, and that's the only thing he's really really upset about. Why did you steal my house gods? And Jacob's like, whoever stole them, let them die. And that, to me, demonstrates Jacob had no idea that Rachel had smuggled away these house gods. But they do all this search. They can't find them. Rachel has learned trickery too, and she's, she comes up with a story so that she doesn't have to get up. And, the way of women is with me. And so that made, he's like, okay, fine. Well, they have it out. Jacob's like, look, you're accusing me of being a thief. Laban throws it back, says, everything you own is mine. But what can I do? God told me to leave you alone, so fine. And so they part and they make covenants, and there's stones come into play again. Let these stones be witnesses of what we've done here. And basically, this is not a reconciliation. This is basically, you're seeing a significant break between Aram, the nation of Aram, the Aramites. Abraham was an Aramite. Isaac went back to get a wife from the Aramites. Jacob went back to get wives from the Aramites. That stops. There's no longer any communication, any mingling of the two nations. You're seeing the nations break away. And they make a boundary. And that boundary is, Laban, you're not coming across here to do me harm. Okay, fine. You're not coming across there either. And so it's not a amicable parting. It's more of a, you didn't have God on your side, I'd just tear you up and take what's mine. It was not a nice parting. But Jacob survives. And he has his family and all of this stuff. So that brings us to the second bookend, the end bookend, in chapter 32, which is, it's another weird one. But I think everybody has at least heard the story of Jacob. He's getting ready now. He's gotten away from Laban. He's got that problem solved. He's made a break there. But now he's got to deal with Esau. And he's hearing stuff from, Esau's coming. He's got 400 men. Oh, crud. And so he starts doing all of this stuff, and he divides up his group, and so he starts sending presents, and they say, well, send the animals first, and if they ask, say, these are gifts for you from your servant Jacob. And then there's another group comes behind him, and another group comes behind him, and then he has his family, and he divides them in half and says, well, if Esau attacks one, at least I'll have half my family. And he's doing all this stuff. He sends everybody forward, and then we find him alone by himself on this side of the river. Again, here's that river, the cross. There's that Exodus motif. He's by himself, and then we have this account of Jacob wrestling with a man all night long. I'm going to emphasize man because that's what the author does. a man. Nothing special about the word. He wrestles with a man. But you can tell by reading that this is not an ordinary man. Jacob quickly understands this is not an ordinary man. The author does not go into detail about why were they fighting. It just said that there was a wrestle, a struggle. And more important is what is said here. They're wrestling, they're struggling, and it talks about the man touches his hip, and it puts his hip out of socket. And this verse I have, verse 26, comes after that. That's important. It comes after this. Jacob, that's the he. Then Jacob said, the man. Then he said, let me go, for the day has broken. But Jacob said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. I've seen this described as that Jacob won. That Jacob was too strong. And I'm thinking, this is an angel of God, at the very least. Jacob's lucky to be alive. So keep that in mind. But I want to look at Jacob's need here. This is after he'd already had his hip dislocated. He ain't fighting no more. He's clinging. The man is not begging for relief from a superior opponent. He's like us trying to shake a kid off of our leg. Let me go. I've got to get to work. No, Daddy, I'm not letting go. Not till you give me a hug. That kind of thing. Basically, this man trying to drag him off. So what Jacob does is now Jacob is realizing something. That this person that he's wrestling with is his superior, likely divine. Now again, we've got to remember, this is not a Christian man that has the whole Bible to read and figure out what angels are and what they're not. For all he knows, he was wrestling a man. Suddenly he realizes this is no ordinary man. Could this be? And later on we'll see he interprets it that I've wrestled with God and survived. But right here, I see in this, he's recognizing a superior, someone who is capable. You don't ask for blessings from someone who's your equal or who is lesser than you. So there's an implied, this man is superior to me. Blessing's significant. What's the big deal about blessing? Why does Jacob need to be blessed? He needs assurances. He's getting ready to meet Esau. He doesn't know if Esau is just going to murder his entire family or not. But wait, didn't God promise him? Yeah. But what's that promise to Jacob when all of his family is maybe going to be slaughtered? His faith's not there yet. Now he's got a hold of, and he's slowly starting to realize, I'll get my blessing from him. That's where I need my blessing from. I've done all this stuff, but it ain't going to work. I need a blessing. So I think you're starting to slowly see Jacob turn around here. The other thing is this is interesting, when he does this, he's got a hold of him. Let me go. No, I will not let go of you unless you bless me. Who are you again? That seem odd to you? In a conflict like this? You could just say, no, I'm not going to bless you. No, the answer was, who are you? I think flip the qualifier. What are you? What does Jacob mean? Deceiver, conniver, con man. One who supplants, literally. In other words, Jacob, what are you? I'm a con man. I'm a fake. The blessing I received is tarnished because I got it by trickery. The birthright I basically stole because I took advantage of my brother.
But then he's not believing what he was told.
Yeah, and he's not believing.
When God told him.
Yeah. And so, but notice how this guy is responding to him.
He spent the next 20 years being conned by his father.
Yeah. So I think he saw, he started being on the receiving end of all this. But then what does this guy say? Not anymore. You will no longer be called one who supplants. You will be called one who wrestles with God. Israel. Israel. The one, and actually, well, I'll get to that. It's got it here. If you put the word together, Israel means God who struggles.
Mine says that Israel means power or prince of God.
Prince. That's interesting. It's got that struggle.
That's what I was taught in Sunday school class in Acts 2.
Yeah, it's one. It's God struggles, or God who struggles. But you see how the man flips that. He's not saying I have struggled with you. He's saying you have struggled with God and with man and have prevailed. So he's taking the name of that and flipping it. So Israel is the one who struggles with God, is what the man intended for the meaning to be. What is that? You're like, well, so what? It's a subtle, it's names. Why does he flip the name? I think, is God is the one who initiated this struggle.
Jacob wasn't in his will and line.
Yeah. So,
And we do that too.
right.
You know, we
I
try
gotta stay over here.
to walk in our way instead of doing God's will. And when we do that, we're going to struggle too. We're going to try to pull and tug
You're in my head. That's good though.
until we surrender
It's verifying. Yeah.
to His will. Then
Yeah. You're seeing. Yeah, it's good. Exactly. You're seeing Jacob slowly coming around. Through this story, we're seeing basically. It's hard for us because we know the history of Israel. Israel, their whole history has been one long struggle with God.
In other interesting places where it took place, like the fords of the Jabbok was the border of the Promised Land.
Yep.
And it means the place of empty.
And before
So it's,
Jacob could go across,
he had to empty every single one of his possessions. He had to come face to face with God and actually do business with God at the place of emptying before he could even get over to what was his covenant promise. Because until God, who he's wrestling with, lets him go,
yep,
he
he
can't.
can't go. Yeah, and that's neat stuff because this is not being made up. This takes some thinking, some pondering, some working, and some understanding of the types and how they move through. All of this is pointing, and again, Moses was recording this for his people, for God's people.
I'm kind of confused by what he just said though, because it wasn't God that was holding on to him; it was him holding on to God. Like he was
Yeah, but he was
afraid to go.
the effect is he was not going to go across until God blessed him. So it's a flipping. It flips. It wasn't that God was necessarily preventing him, but in a way he was. It's as long as God withheld the blessing, Jacob's not going anywhere. He can't. I think he's finally broken to the point of I can't go over there. Yeah, I can't go over there unless you, and this experience somehow, because it talks about when he did go, he's basically a broken man staggering across, and he actually says, I survived. And so this word prevailed here. It's not like a military victory. It is you're still alive. You endured it. You made it through. You had the audacity to test God. You got your blessing, but in that process of it broke him. It broke him physically, but I think it also broke him where he was willing, like what you're saying, where it broke him to realize you're the one. And we read this, we see this verified when we read his words. later on. So let's jump.
Can I say one?
Yeah.
Because it's echoing in the back of my mind, his hip was wrenched. But you read in Leviticus, any man that was lame in the leg could not enter the house of God.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if there's some play.
Yeah, that would be an interesting.
Yeah, I mean, you can see it as, his walk looked a little bit different after he met with God.
That would be something. I honestly don't have a. That's an interesting observation, though.
Because here, God does it to him as a form of blessing him. I'm going to cripple you, so you remember me. And this is what you take for the rest of your life.
Yeah. So well, and again, actually, the commentator. I didn't write this down, but it came back to mind when you said that. I was looking at this one commentator, and he pointed out that was a representative of, like, Jacob had these great feats of physical strength. They're in those chapters where, like, when he first comes to Haran, and he basically takes the stone off the well himself and waters the flock for Rachel. You could say, well, he was showing off for his girlfriend. I don't know, but he was obviously strong enough to do that. He had physical strength. Esau is always shown as the mighty hunter and stuff, but then later you start seeing Jacob exhibiting some feats of strength. And he conned his way, which was his own mental ability to think sharp and to con and come up with ways to trick and connive. God broke that with a touch. Just boom. You're not strong enough now. You don't have that. And so I think it was, and he pointed out, he thought it was another aspect of the breaking down of Jacob at this point. But no, that'd be an interesting thing to just dig into and see if there was. We need to get a hold of some Jewish scribes that understand a little more into that. Let's jump ahead, and actually, I told you a lot of this stuff first, and now I want to show you why I think where it kind of clicked into my mind. Because Hosea, this is out of Hosea, and this is hundreds of years later. This is when Israel's in the middle. Israel's a nation, and they're. God is sending the prophets to try to turn them around. And in Hosea chapter 12, he writes this, in the womb, talking about Jacob, he took his brother by the heel, and in his manhood, he strove with God. So he's referencing this thing in Genesis. Hosea is. He strove with the angel and prevailed. That's why I'm saying that was an angel of God. He wept and sought his favor. See that? That's not obvious in that original story. But this is where Scripture informs Scripture. That's why I came to the conclusion that hanging on, where I will not let you go unless you bless me, was weeping and begging. It wasn't I have defeated you and I'm not letting you go until, no, it was, please bless me. Even though I'm getting that from Hosea, from his commentary on this. He wept and sought his favor. He met God at Bethel, and there God spoke with us. That's not a typo. Hosea is bringing Jacob and Israel into one experience. That's where I get that idea that a lot of what's happening with Jacob is repeated by the nation itself. The Lord, the God of hosts, the Lord is his memorial name. In other words, just want to make sure you know who we're talking about here. So now Hosea shifts to the present, his present time, and says, so you, meaning like then, so you now, by the help of your God, return. Then he does a word play. Hold fast. Grab on to what? Love and justice, and do what? Wait for your God. Wait for the blessing. Grab on and wait. And so remember, the context of Hosea is Israel was sinning, and God was going to send judgment. And Hosea is saying, you need to be like Jacob. Like, what? Once you're broken down, once God has judged you, grab a hold of him and beg. Plead for mercy. Plead for what you need. So I see a lot. That's why I think Hosea informs stuff in Genesis that we don't have written down explicitly. It's there with the help of Hosea. What do you guys think? Is that going too far? When you see what's going to happen with Jacob, or what the situation he was in. My brother, he's big, he's ugly. When I left, he wanted to kill me. And now I hear he's got 400 men coming to meet me. And, and again, I think you pointed out that God, he wasn't listening to the promise, that God had said, hey, I'll take care of you. Once he leaves here, you see his attitude. He's still kind of cautious around Esau, but he goes. He crosses the river and he goes and he meets him. And we'll,
It's interesting because whenever God tells him to get up and go, he's like, hey, remember me? I'm the God you met at Bethel.
yeah, he refers to that.
There we go. So he's still struggling with that whole concept of, hang on, I have a vow that I made with this.
Yeah, now I've got to keep my vow.
Either trust him now to bring me back in one piece or not. But he's kept his end of the bargain, and I'm scared.
Let me see if I've got the... Yeah, here's how Jacob concludes this. So he called the name of this place Peniel, the face of God, saying, for I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered. That's what that prevailing meant, meaning he didn't kill me. Why didn't he kill him? Because of the promise. And I think it may not have been right at this.
It's not until after all that.
Yeah, I don't know, and I don't know if he fully clicked, but his actions change after this. He's not perfect, but you definitely see, you don't see as much of the conniving. You see it happening to him still, but you don't see him actively. There's a lot more. And then when you hear his blessings that he gives on his children and stuff like that. But then,
I never focused so much on his conniving before, but now I know that kind of makes sense why Joseph's brothers did what they did.
well, yeah, it was a family trait. I mean, they learned it from grandpa all the way down. I mean, it's crazy. Talk about familial sins. We do. We tend to, if you grow up in a household that has certain things, you tend to be.
I just thought they were mean. Now I'm like,
Not mean. They're just doing what they've been taught.
And I think you really see throughout this whole story up to this point is God isn't concerned with your moral perfection. He's concerned about your allegiance.
Obedience over sacrifice. I'll cut my arm off for you, God. It's like, I don't want your stupid arm. I want you. That kind of, yeah. I don't want your actions of trying to impress me. I want your allegiance. I want your obedience. Now, this one, I mean, this just kind of popped into my brain, but I made a list of kind of what I get out of it. It's Hosea, but it's also the story in Genesis. But you put these things two together. Let me actually wait. I jumped ahead. Sorry. This is the one I wanted. To put it into our time. I don't do that all the time, but this one just lends itself perfectly. So you should follow my logic here. When we speak about salvation, we know that God initiates it, right? No one seeks after God. He seeks after us. So remember, God initiated this struggle with Jacob. He initiates the same struggle with us. He approaches us. We're minding our own business, waltzing, rolling down the hill to hell. Not a care in the world, right? When does our life get difficult? When God gets involved. And so our relationship with God is characterized by a struggle between our old and new natures, a struggle between thinking and acting godly versus thinking and acting naturally. That's what, Annette, that's what I said, you were in my head. And that's true. I used to explain it to the children that when you're an unbeliever, there is no struggle. There may be bad things in life and stuff that I'm talking about. There's not a struggle within you. You're a slave. Paul taught you're just a slave. You just do what you're told. when we become a Christian, that's when the struggle starts. Because God doesn't just, for whatever, he just doesn't do that. Remember James. Now God's like, okay, I got you. You're enrolled. Training session 1 starts now. But what, don't I have time to sit and relax? No. And so now our struggle begins. And our struggle, yeah, it's with our old nature and new nature, but really our struggle is between us and God. We're wrestling with God. God permits it. He wants it. He encourages it. He provokes it. I mean, I was just saying, He comes up and jabs us in the chest, say, hey, what are you going to do? Want to fight? And that's our nature. He knows what our nature is going to do. Get away from me, God. No, I ain't going nowhere. Let me go. No. And that's what God wants us to do. Is finally, he breaks us down little by little by little by little by little, not to kill us, but so that he can bless us. But he wants us to ask for the right thing. Just like he was waiting for Jacob to finally get to the point so that he could bless him. So it's our own personal struggle. So our objective as Christians is not to have victory over God. I mean, that sounds strange. I know everybody's going, well, no. But some people have that attitude. Even Christians can kind of get that attitude of God's in their way. I got to get God out of my way so I can do what I want because I'm doing God's work.
We want to tell him what.
Yeah, I know what you want, God, but I think Hagar will do fine. Before we mock Abraham, think about ourselves. Well, God says to do this. God says to be a witness, so I'm going to go and bash him over the head with the Bible and witness to that sucker. God's like, no, I want you to go over there. That guy? Yeah, that guy. He's kind of mean looking. Okay, I know. I don't even know who he is. I don't care. Go to that guy. But I know this guy. No, this one. No, I'm going over here. Pow, right in the face. Why'd you let that happen, God? I don't know. I'm just a mean God. I just figured, why not? I told you to go over here. So, I see a lot of analogy between the Christian, and I'm not trying to use it in a bad and negative way, but if we're honest with ourselves, we struggle. We fight with God. Now, it shouldn't be an ongoing, knock down, drag out kind of thing. Otherwise, that's a signal there's something wrong with us. What I'm talking about more is like, okay, yeah, more of the parental kind of, okay, I know your dad, but I don't agree with you here. When I was a kid, that made sense because I was stupid. But now I'm an adult and I know some stuff. And you think, well, as we mature as Christians, isn't it supposed to be easier? In a lot of ways, it gets worse because we think we start knowing stuff. Oh, I got this. I don't need you, God. I got this one. I've read the book. I figured it out. I taught the lesson. Boom, down we go. And God kind of walks over and goes, hurts, don't it? And occasionally, God may have to tweak our hip. Because we get in our own strength and say, well, I can do this. And so there's lots of things within this. Remember, these things were written for our learning, not just so we have knowledge in our head, but because it helps us in our day-to-day walk as we wrestle and struggle with a God that we can't quite grasp. We can get all pious as Christians. Well, I have the Holy Spirit. So what? So do all Christians. That's not the point. The point is, you're glad you got him because we couldn't even get this far without him. But the idea is there's still going to be, God wants us to cling in a weird way. He wanted Jacob to cling to him. Well, he said let him go. Yeah, but again, he told Abraham to kill his son too. He didn't really want him to do that. So everything is not a direct command of God. It's an indication of what does God want from Jacob. What he got from him. I've conned everybody I can con. I can't con God. He tried to con God with his vow.
Well, that might have been a test for Jacob too, because he said, let me go,
Yeah, true. So, I just think it's a neat, I tell you, when I first started reading into this, none of this was really in my brain. So this was kind of neat to me to see all this, this was popping out at me. Like, hey, this is awesome. I tried to shorten it, but it didn't work. But any other thoughts from y'all? As we enter into the glorious season of his first advent.
It means anything, but the part where Jacob was promised by Laban, you could have all the spotted and the striped and the black sheep. And then Jacob goes and starts getting certain branches and peeling them and making them the sheep and goats breathe in front of the branches to get the strip. Was that like Granny Pampet, I knew 30-day stuff water stuff, or was it like?
Yeah, it was basically the best I've been able to. We don't know exactly, but it was a form of divination. The mention of mandrakes; those were thought to increase fertility. So you go back and read that story, or why was Leah fighting over mandrakes with Rachel? Again, they thought this would increase fertility. That's why Rachel wanted them. So you still see the physical side of Jacob and his family coming out, but you also notice out of Jacob's own mouth. I had it. Well, God tells him first and says, whenever the spotted and the striped, God basically says, I'm doing this for you. I'm prospering you no matter what. And Jacob even finally admits it. When he's talking with it, Jacob admits that. So, but you're seeing the reality of their life where in the household God thing, why did she feel the need to take those with her? Because that was a very important part of their culture and society. So they hadn't fully grasp this one God only, that we think, well, what? They're a bunch of pagans. Yeah, they are. And God's working with them. And he's working with them. And to me, that's again, another image of when we're saved, we're still pagan in a lot of ways. But now God's got a relationship. And now God's like, okay, come on. And he's trying to pry things out of our hands. He just let me have it. Let me have it. But other times we're like, and he's like, okay, we'll work on that later. Let's try this. And our whole life is this depaganizing. Paul words it, changing, transforming our mind, getting us to think different. Because we start thinking different, we process things different, and that should lead to different actions. But it's a process. And just this idea that, well, I've got the Holy Spirit, suddenly I'm there. That's not how it works. Now, I've seen people where God has broke them of addictions and stuff like that, like this. So I'm not saying he does. I'm just talking about that doesn't mean he's going to do that to every single person every single time.
It doesn't mean he's gonna do it for everything.
Right, or for everything. Yeah, I mean, there's.
He broke my drug and alcohol addiction like that.
Yeah.
But other things have taken and still take.
And there's still, yeah, it's like he's like, that was the easy part. I got rid of all the easy stuff, and we're thinking we think that was the thing. Now I'm fine. It's like, oh no. That was the easy part. Now we're going to start getting into the painful stuff, and.
So that was Jacob just trying to connive bigger flocks for himself in his own.
In his own way, and somewhere in the process, he's starting to realize that, God's doing this. But I just thinking it's neat because you're starting to see his progression, and it's kind of hit and miss, and you have to kind of go back and read it again, and then start going, oh, I'm seeing it now, and I mean I'll go back and read it. Oh shoot, I should have brought this up and this up and this up, but you'll do that, you'll see, and that's just that's the neat thing about Scripture is keep going back to it, and because God's like, read it again. Why should Naaman dip 7 times in a nasty river? Why should I read the same passage 7 times, God? I've read it 6, I'm done. It's like, if you'd have read it 7, I mean, I had something amazing. But you didn't read it last time I told you to. So you missed it.
What I get out of this whole few chapters is we're all on a journey of life.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't matter where we're at on that journey, God wants to meet us there.
Yes, very good. That's very good. And that's true, yeah, that's definitely. God will, and the idea with me, my big thought was that when I realized God's the provoking agent. When he came to Jacob, I keep wanting to say Joseph, Jacob, out of the blue and says, "Hey, I'm dropping the promise on you, bud." Knowing full well Jacob had no clue at that point. 20 years later, "Hey, Jacob, remember me? Remember that vow?" And by that point, Jacob's like, I'm starting to see what you're talking about now. I wasn't able to con my way through all of this. I know it had to be you. Because Laban was a trickster, and he kept shifting things around on me. You read that. He says, "You changed my wages 10 times in 20 years. And you kept, and he would. He'd see getting success with the striped flock, so he'd try to change things. And then God would just keep giving Jacob success. So, yeah, but our journey is, we read it and think, wow, that was amazing. No, think about Jacob, 20 years, living with his uncle and his wives that did not get along and were constantly going at each other, house full of kids, and he ain't getting paid squat. I've worked for this slob for 20 years, and he's given me nothing. And he's like, I've had to trick and connive and steal and borrow and do all sorts of things to get the herd I've got. I better cut and run now. And God has to stop him and say, hey, I did all that. And so you see that, and we don't know how old we'll be when God does that to us. We might think, hey, I'm getting ready to go across the river now. And God yanks us back. It's like, no, you ain't going across there yet. I got one little lesson to teach you here. So, anyway, good stuff. Remember next week, get your eggs and we'll go. No, you get to start it off, don't you? Yes. Yeah, no pressure, right? Get it started off on the right foot. So.
I think Joel had to do it last year. I think he was first.
Carl gave me the choice.
Oh, you're one of those. You like to be the one who volunteers first.